Hey, Slater Crusaders. America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. We got a lot to talk about Afghanistan coming up a little later in the show. I got a lot of questions. Biden wants this to be in the past tense, the withdrawal. It's clearly not. It's still clearly ongoing. But I'm trying to look a little into the future. I don't know how thousands of Americans don't die out of this unless on the Taliban's good graces, they allow Americans to leave. I don't even know what leverage we have over them right now. We're in a really bad position. And I got a lot of questions about that, and I'm grateful because we have an amazing guest coming up in just a little bit to talk more about that. But first, building up to that, don't trust the experts. Did you see these doctors in Florida yesterday? They didn't go on strike. But this was a stunt they did, where they walked out on their job for a while to protest unvaccinated people. How dare you get sick? Have you ever seen anything like this before? Where doctors are like, we're not going to treat this certain group of people over here. We're not going to give them medical treatment. Could you imagine a couple years ago if doctors walked out on AIDS patients? Like imagine if that was the thing. Imagine if doctors were like, we're not going to treat AIDS patients anymore because, listen, I mean, it's kind of your own fault, right? Imagine if doctors collectively decided to not treat anyone who attempts suicide. It's like, well, you wanted to die anyway. Why am I responsible for you? Or, no, we're not going to treat anyone with lung cancer anymore. I mean, tough noogies, right? Shouldn't have smoked all those years. Or let's no longer even treat heart attacks, or at least certain heart attacks. I mean, it's the number one leading cause of death, but imagine how much money and time we could save if we didn't treat anyone who had heart attacks. Or at least people who are over a certain body mass index. Sorry, fatty. Shouldn't have had that Twinkie. So, why do we have to treat you? Why do I have to take my time out of my day to treat you when you did this to yourself? Drug addicts, certainly. I mean, they're not worth helping, right? Some meth head comes in. You're going to treat a meth head? No way. How about a drug-dealing gang member who was shot by another gang member in a turf war? Do we got to save his life? We're not going to treat his injuries. Because you know what? We need to teach people like him a lesson. We need to teach people like him a lesson. I have one. Let's say there's a guy who's trying to rape a woman, and police come and shoot the guy. They don't kill him, but they shoot him, and he's got to go to the hospital. I mean, what are you going to do, doctors? You really going to treat a rapist? You're going to save the life of a rapist? I don't think so. So it's an interesting question, but what other moral judgments are doctors now going to put on people when deciding if that person is deserving and worthy of medical treatment? Are you worthy of medical treatment? Do you see how quickly it goes from healthcare is a right to, well, except for you. Medicare for all. Not all. I don't mean, when I say Medicare for all, I mean the 60% of people who are vaccinated, all, right? Of course not the unvaccinated, obviously. This MSNBC story that we just had in the background there too, the reporter says the ICU is operating. It's a disaster. It's unbelievable. We can't be sustained. The ICU is operating at 85% capacity. Wow, 85% capacity. What he doesn't say is that ICUs always operate at 85% capacity. They're always operate between 80 and 90% all the time. So that's called fear-mongering. That is purposefully not giving perspective in order to spread fear and panic as opposed to peace and perspective. This is why it's reporting like this for the last 19 months, why people think that if you get COVID, there's a 38% chance that you die. There's a poll done, and they asked people, so if you get COVID, what do you think your chances are of dying? And the average response was 38% chance of dying. That's insane. It's 0.02, not 38. And this is why people think that 9% of Americans have died from COVID. 9% of Americans have died? That would be 30 million deaths. There's not been 9%. It's 0.19%. How could people be so far off? How could people be so far off between 600,000 deaths and 30 million? It's because the media is in the disinformation business. They're in the fear-mongering business, and people are scared. And then when I provide some peace and perspective and numbers and facts and studies, I'm the disinformation person or whatever. When I try to provide perspective and peace, I'm the bad guy with it, right? The problem is when people are scared, they lose their minds. This is a real headline. New super variant named COVID-22 could be more dangerous than the Delta strain, experts warned. Wow, so you read the article, it's one guy, and he's talking about a hypothetical variant that doesn't even exist. What is that if not pure fear-mongering? He's saying, well, maybe one day there could be a variant that, and they write a whole article about it. When people are scared, they do things they would never dream of doing. That's the point of this segment. When people are scared, they do things they would never dream of doing in all their life. I cannot get over the story in Australia where the local council, I'm assuming they told the police, I don't know who else has guns in Australia, but they told someone in the government, I'm assuming the police, to go to the local animal shelter and shoot the dogs. Shoot and kill the dogs. Why? Do dogs spread COVID? No, it was to prevent the people who volunteer at the animal shelter from leaving their house to travel and take care of the dogs. So instead, we're just going to shoot the dogs. Now, if you asked the person who did that, who shot the dogs, if you asked them last week, hey, would you ever shoot a dog in the head? They would give the same answer that you would give. No, of course not. I'm not a monster. Okay, would you shoot many dogs in the head? No, how dare you ask me such a horrific question? But sure enough, someone did. Why? Because they were ordered. They were ordered to by their superiors. Just doing my job. Has there been an excuse in the history of the world that has, at least people feel like, has given them cover to perform some of the most satanic, horrific atrocities in all of history as the excuse, I was just doing my job? But that's the kind of thing that happens when everyone's afraid. People do things that they would never think that they would ever do. And don't think that you're any better than that police officer either, who shot the dogs. Would you ever cause purposeful physical pain to healthy children by forcing them to wear something over their face all day long at school? No, of course I wouldn't do that, Slater. That's crazy. I would never suggest we cause physical pain to our children. Well, now we are, with masking kids, little kids, 2-year-olds. How could anyone support that? If you asked any doctor 2 years ago, would you ever support such a thing? They'd be like, no, of course not. That's absurd. But now they do, because people have lost their minds. This is an epidemiologist at Boston. She says, genuine question for people more concerned about schools being closed than COVID. Are you aware that mandatory schooling is barely a century old in this country? Maybe your grandparents had high school, but what about your great-grandparents? Yes, education's important, but it's a pandemic. That's the worst argument ever, right? But it's a pandemic. Look at what that argument causes people to do. It causes people to force little children, 2-year-olds, to wear masks all day. It causes people to say, oh, school doesn't matter. Who needs it? Who needs school anyway? And it causes people to shoot dogs in the head. And it's all justified by, oh, well, it's a pandemic. Just doing my job. This is why fear is a bad thing. It's why you should not be motivated by fear. And that's why the people who are spreading it are doing a terrible, terrible thing. Now, the guy who shot the dogs in the head, the people, I'm sure there were a couple people who did it. He's probably not a bad person, right? I'm sure he's never hurt a dog in his life. I'm sure he's never hurt a person in his life. I'm sure he's a very normal guy. He would never have thought that he would ever do such a thing. But when people are scared and in systems where there's no accountability, led by power-hungry maniacs, bad things happen. And fear drives otherwise normal people to do bad things. And it's the same thing with Afghanistan. I don't know if other people are doing this or not, but we do it every day. COVID and Afghanistan are the same story. So we always bring these stories together with the big overarching principle, in this case, fear. The Pentagon spokesperson, is he a bad person? Probably not. But they're all lying to you. The Pentagon spokesperson was asked yesterday, they were like, hey, you said that the Taliban wouldn't take over for a year or whatever. How could you be so wrong? And he said, listen, based on what we knew at the time, I said what we believed to be true. Okay, fine, I'll believe you. But you couldn't have been more wrong. Couldn't have been more wrong at the speed that they would take over the whole country. So they're either epically wrong all the time or lie to you all the time. How about this video of the White House spokesperson?
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home. And I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
Okay, and then
not stranded. Okay. I wonder what this woman, who called a West Virginia congresswoman begging for help, would describe her current situation.
Hour by hour, it's getting more difficult. Even when the cars pass by, I feel like they're gonna stop by the door and they're the Taliban and they're gonna come in and kill us. I'm really scared. Please, please help me whenever it's the soonest.
Not stranded. She's not stranded. How dare you say that? Now, Jen Psaki, Kirby, the Pentagon spokesperson, these aren't bad people. The guy who shot the dog in the head, the woman saying, school doesn't matter. These are normal people. But bad people get away with evil things when good people don't stop and say, enough already. So who are the bad people? Who are the people really calling the shots? I'll give you an example. This is Michael Hayden. He's a 4-star general, okay? This guy used to be the director of the National Security Agency and the director of the CIA. And someone wrote on Twitter, can we send the MAGA-wearing unvaxxed to Afghanistan? No use sending that plane back empty. And he responded, good idea. What? That's the former head of the CIA. He retweeted this picture. It says their Taliban at the top. That's actually ISIS, but whatever. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good meme. And then at the bottom, our Taliban, and there was a Trump rally with Trump flags. That's the former director of the CIA, 2006 to 2009, calling Trump supporters our Taliban. These are the leaders. These are the people who are running the show. He was the head of the CIA. He wasn't just a spokesperson, right? He wasn't just a police officer. He wasn't just an epidemiologist at a hospital. Like, he was the head of the CIA. These are the types of people who are running the show. They're the ones who are causing a lot of otherwise good people and normal people to support terrible things and do terrible things. And it takes courageous people like you to step up and say, no, no more. I will not comply. I will not be a part of this. You will not get me to shoot a dog in the head. Coming up next, I want to talk about what I think is the biggest heretical misconception in our country today, and it's the root of really all the problems in your life, my life, and our country. Talk about that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I'm excited to talk about Afghanistan coming up in the next segment. Got some important questions to get answered. But first, I want to take a step back and do a little life lesson right here. All of the problems in America are caused by our sinful hearts. Let me say it again. All the problems caused in my life, your life, and our country are caused by sinful hearts. I would argue that the most heretical, commonly held belief in our country and in our culture is, and most people believe, that people are inherently good. And if you've listened to my radio show, you know that this is a mini crusade of mine to get people to realize how sinful their hearts naturally and actually are. You've been lied to by atheists that people are generally good. It's not true. Why have atheists spread this lie? Because if you're a sinner, which is true, if you're a sinner, if you recognize that you're inherently not good, then you realize you need saving. But the atheist got rid of the Savior. How? By telling people that they don't need one. You don't need a Savior. You're perfect just the way you are. Fine, maybe you're a little rough around the edges, so maybe this self-help book will be useful for you. Oh, what's that? You're absolutely miserable in every way? Well, you need a lot of self-help books and maybe some yoga, and you can rub these crystals and drink this and watch this, and whatever you do, don't become a Christian. That's all silly superstition. You're better than that. A little more self-help is all you need. The way that atheists in America got rid of God was by getting rid of people's need for God. Tell them they're great. You don't need him. So that's the first point. Culture tells you incorrectly that you are inherently good so that you don't need a Savior. Second point. We are so concerned about the bad things around us that we forget about the sin that's inside of us. People tend to look at the temptations that exist around us, which is true, there are temptations, but those temptations only have power because of the sin that's inside of you. Right? The temptation is outside, no doubt, but it appeals to the sin that is in you. It appeals to the sin of idolatry and selfishness, greed, lust, laziness, materialism, pride. Those are in you. The problem is not the external things per se. It's the fact that they're even appealing in the first place. And they're appealing because of the sin that's inside your heart, which is proof that you're not inherently good. No one is righteous. No, not one. Now, if we ever do think about the sin that's in our hearts, we quickly turn that around on the other guy. We focus on the sins of the other guy. And when we do that, we minimize our own. And when we minimize our own sin, we start to think too highly of ourselves. We let our guard down, and then those external temptations seem a lot more appealing. That's the danger with only looking at other sins. So first point, culture tells you that you're inherently good so you don't need a Savior. Second point, it's always the other guy who needs to be fixed, not me. Third point, when we focus on other people's sin, we complain more. We're more discontent, more anxious, more envious. When your heart is ruled by envy, you move from a posture of I am blessed to a posture of I deserve. Our culture is ruled by sinful, prideful, I deserve hearts. And you can see it in our politics, right? It's all feelings and wants and fears. And when that's the case, you're in big trouble. Now, stay with me here. Because we all now think I deserve, we kick God to the curb. Because he doesn't know, or he's not providing me with what I want. When you're envious of what someone else has, you don't trust God. You're doubting God. You push God aside. And then who fills the void? Government. When you push God aside, then when you push God aside when it comes to your blessings, then you clearly will also push God aside when it comes to his commands and his warnings. And when you don't listen to God's commands and warnings, then it's just a matter of time before you're crushed. And this is the key right here, is we'll bring it all together. When you think you have it under control because you're so perfect, right? When you think you have it all under control because you're so perfect, and then bad things happen because you don't have it under control, then you start to want to control other people. Masks are a good example of this, right? I want to control the virus. I'm going to wear a mask. Well, masks don't work, so you still get sick. So then what do? Well, you blame the other guy for not wearing masks, right? And then when that doesn't work, then you blame them for not being vaccinated. And then you mandate that they get vaccinated. If they don't get vaccinated, they're not allowed to go eat. They're not allowed to go on airplanes. They're not allowed to go to work. Do you see that, right? You start to control other people. When you think you have things under control, you don't. When you think you do, and bad things still happen, then you start to control other people. And how do you control other people? Through the government. The government will make all these problems go away once and for all, they think. So let's map it all out here. I know I threw a lot here, right? Here's the right way of thinking first. Let's give the difference. Right? So the right way is, I'm a sinner, I need a savior. Only God can save me. And I'm so grateful for his saving me. What else does he tell me to do? I'll do anything. I'm so grateful for God's grace. I will do whatever he tells me to do. You want me to serve other people? Pfft, done. Love it. Let's do it. Who do you want me to serve? My neighbor? Who's my neighbor? Everyone? Great. Let's do it. What do you want me to do about trials? Consider them a joy? Great. I'll consider them a joy. Whatever you say. How about that country? Pretty good culture, huh? Pretty good community. Pretty good country if we all operated like that, wouldn't it? Sounds like a good place to live. A good way to live. Or we can continue down the path we've been on. I am perfect in every way, just the way that I am. No need for God. I know what's best for me. And I'm so perfect, I should have everything. But I don't have everything. That guy does. I'm jealous of him. I want what's his. I'm bitter, I'm angry. And I empower the government to take it from him and give it to me and tear him down in the process. Full of hatred, pride. And because of that, temptations are now very appealing. Your sinful heart is looking for pleasure in all the wrong places. And it's actually not looking for pleasure. It's looking to be distracted and numbed from the pain that you feel. God's not in my life, so he's not in control. And if he's not, then who is? I am. Then a virus comes. And even with a 99.98% survival rate, it rocks my world because I thought I was in control of everything. God's not in control. There is no God. So I'm in control. So I'll wear my mask and I'll force everyone else to wear it too. And then I'll get vaccinated and then I'll force everyone else too because I'm in control. And ultimately, because I'm so scared of death, I'm scared to death of death because this life is all that there is. After this, I don't know, there's just a nothingness. After this, I'm so deathly afraid of dying. I will gladly have the government take away everything, all of my rights, and everything about life to protect me from dying. Because my biggest fear is death. And the government promises that they will protect me from dying. And they'll protect me from that guy. Because he's the real problem. Not me, I'm perfect. That guy is the problem. And people choose the promise of peace over freedom. The root of all this COVID overreaction is people's fear of death. And the root of that fear is our atheist culture. If we had a collectively Christian outlook to COVID and everything, then we'd be much better off. Everything would be much more proportional, much more peaceful. Our founders knew this. It's common sense. But it's the progressive atheists who for, 50 years now, 60 years, they've been running the show now for a long time. How's that working out? Look around, how's that working out? Look around your life, how's that working out for you? How's it working out for our country? Have we been handling difficulties well? Have we been handling our trials well in a healthy way? No. Let me end with this. Maybe you've seen this guy before. He was in the Russian KGB. He defected in the 80s. Here he is talking about demoralization.
Most of it is done by Americans to Americans. thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization.
Notice before that, in the beginning, he said it's the erosion of moral standards. The erosion of moral standards that leads to the demoralization. And a person who's demoralized is unable to assess true information. We're going to play more from Yuri a little later in the week. Don't get demoralized. But how do you not get demoralized? Will you increase your moral standards? Don't give up. And don't hand over your rights to the government for the promise of safety. Because the government is not your savior. Coming up next, we'll talk with someone about Afghanistan. And I got some major questions about how we're going to get people out in the next 7 days. And what happens if we don't? How many Americans could die? No one's really talking about that. Talk about it next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. How terrible that I'm even pitching to this clip, but this is a Taliban spokesperson.
You can say it's a red line. President Biden announced this agreement that until 31st of August they would withdraw all their military forces. So if they extend it, that means they are extending occupation. While there is no need for that, I think it will deteriorate the relation, will create mistrust between us. If they are intent on continuing the occupation, so it will provoke a reaction.
August 31st, 7 days. This is Adam Schiff, of all people.
Do you think that it's possible for the evacuations to finish up before August 31st?
I think it's possible, but I think it's very unlikely.
This is Robert Wilkie. He's a colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve's former secretary of the VA, now at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Wilkie, how are you, sir?
Fine, thank you, Mark. And I would say more importantly about my background, I was Undersecretary of Defense for General Mattis before I went over to VA. And it was from that perch that I participated in planning and operational consideration.
Tremendous. Let me ask you one question of the moment, and then we can go back if you don't mind a little bit. I'm concerned that if we have, and I don't know, they throw out this number 10,000 Americans, and I don't even know if they know or anyone knows. Let's say go 10,000. And there's this arbitrary deadline of August 31st. Are we at the whim of the good graces of the Taliban to get these Americans to the airport? And if so, what's the end? Will they kill the Americans? Are we at risk of thousands of Americans dying? Please talk me off that ledge.
Sure. Well, it's the only time in my life I've ever agreed with Adam Schiff. I don't think it is physically possible to meet this artificial deadline that President Biden set so he could then turn around and give a political speech on September 11th. Hailing himself as the great peacemaker. I want to take a step back in your comments. I've heard a lot of discussion about a repeat of Saigon in 1975, and I certainly, as a youngster, was aware of that. My father had served multiple tours in Vietnam, and by the time Saigon fell, he was a senior officer in the 82nd Airborne Division. I think the more pressing analogy is to Jimmy Carter in Tehran, where our people were left in the middle of a revolution and America was held hostage for well over a year. It destroyed the Carter presidency, and of course it ended up giving us Ronald Reagan. But we are at the mercy of the Taliban. I don't believe, because as you said, we have an accounting of the thousands of Americans who are left in Afghanistan, that it is logistically possible, nor do I see any evidence that the Taliban have opened the gates for these thousands of Americans to move, because what you're also seeing is contradictory statements coming from this administration that you need to get to the airport, but don't come to the airport because it's too dangerous. So logistically, it's a nightmare. Do we put our foot down with overwhelming force and say there will be consequences if we are not allowed to get our people out? Yes, we should. Do I think this administration will do it? No, I don't. And that's where we come to the great threat to Americans, is that because of this deadline, they could be held hostage by the Taliban in numbers that are, exponentially greater than the 50 or so Americans who were held in the embassy in Tehran in 1979 and 1980.
Unbelievable. This is the setup to something absolutely horrific. So the Taliban, can you get me a little insight into the Taliban's motives here and what leverage we may have over them? If not, we're going to drop a bomb on you, which it doesn't look like that's something that Biden would want to do. Is the only leverage, you're not going to be welcome in the international community? Because China is sure going to welcome them. So what do we have over them that would have them not do what they say they want to do, and that is kill great Satan?
Yeah, I shouldn't have laughed, but that's what we are left to with this administration, and that is telling the Taliban you're not going to be welcome in New York City to go to the General Assembly. But remember, this is the same crowd who 5 or 6 years ago, when Paris was hit by Islamic terror, responded by sending James Taylor over to the French Foreign Ministry to sing "You've Got a Friend." And that's what they were reduced to. In terms of our response, it has to be clear. We can put a massive footprint in the airport and tell the Taliban that we can move out. Right now, what we're not seeing in the press is that they're fighting their own people right now. There are various counterinsurgencies going on. And because the country is bankrupt, the one advantage that we have is that we can tell them, although I don't know that this administration will, that they're going to be cut off from world finance. The one thing that we have over the Chinese is that their promises of financial sustenance don't usually bear fruit. And the Russians are certainly not capable of it, nor are the Iranians. So the regime would automatically be bankrupt if the president and his team decide, and I don't think they will, to use that lever. Other than that, without any intelligence on the ground, having given up one of the most secure airfields on the planet, we are in a dire situation. And I've written that I don't believe in our history that we've ever been this low in terms of international stature, in terms of understanding the place of the United States, not only within its own history, but its own place on the planet. And unlike my childhood, when the Soviet Union loomed large over my father and his comrades in arms, the Soviet Union was a one-dimensional threat. It was a brutish regime. The only thing it could offer was kinetic force. We have a much more sinister set of adversaries today than we did then. China seeks to replace us as the center of the universe, restore the Middle Kingdom. The Iranians and the Russians will do everything they can to help kill Americans wherever they are. And we have forgotten in the last few years that Islamic terror is still out there. And last thing I will say on this front, Donald Trump was called the great disruptor of the Western alliance, when all he did was ask the same things that my former bosses, Condoleezza Rice and Robert Gates, did, ask the Europeans to spend more on defense. The notion that a president of the United States would be held in the contempt of the House of Commons in London by our most powerful ally is unheard of in our history. I mean, not even George Washington was condemned in the House of Commons when he was leading a revolution. And that the Chancellor of Germany has said that this president has threatened the very fabric of the Western alliance and Western civilization. That is incredibly dire because we have 3.5 years left of this. So it's much broader than Afghanistan. It plays in Taiwan, it plays in London, it plays in Paris, it plays throughout the Pacific.
My last question for you, sir, is do you anticipate Americans dying? And as you think about your response here, it's going to be really interesting to see if the Taliban truly wants to kill Americans above all else, or if that's just like the PR, the propaganda they use to get local political support, so that they can just be in power locally. I don't know, right? I mean, if their great goal is to kill Americans, but we're sitting ducks.
Right. They wouldn't do it under Donald Trump because they knew the retribution would be massive and rapid. I will say this: Americans are in danger. They've been put in danger by a feckless administration. Give you an idea of what we're dealing with real fast, and I'll go back to Vietnam. So the North Vietnamese broke the Paris Peace Accords. They invaded with a massive conventional strike on South Vietnam, but they were in the open. Gerald Ford is watching this, so is his chief of staff, Donald Rumsfeld. They call out the Air Force. But because it was the post-Watergate era, Congress had passed laws saying that Gerald Ford could not launch the Air Force unless he was given approval by the Congress. The one senator standing in the way in 1975 of Gerald Ford devastating the North Vietnamese army with our Air Force was Joseph Biden, and he's been wrong on every issue since.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just can't believe that story. That's unbelievable.
It is stunning. But even in the Obama administration, this is an individual who opposed the killing of Osama bin Laden. And when we look at the way he operates, let's go back to Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson failed in Vietnam because instead of addressing the problem, he looked to the politics. Mm-hmm. Instead of allowing the kinetic force of the United States to win, he looked at the politics at home. That's what this is all coming down to. A speech on September 11th by Joseph Robinette Biden saying he is the greatest peacemaker since Richard Nixon. He wouldn't say Richard Nixon, but Nixon, of course, took great pride in that title. And of course, he did a lot to advance the cause of peace. But this is what we get when we elect someone not vetted by the press and allowed to sit in a basement and do nothing.
That speech can't possibly happen now, and a long time to go still. Robert Wilkie is now at the Heritage Foundation. Grateful for your service, sir, and thank you for your insight.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark.
Let's talk again. The former Secretary of the VA, but I served under Mattis as well in the Department of Defense, and a colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. I think it got a lot worse. A lot worse. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Well, as we just talked about, we are in the midst of potentially the biggest hostage crisis ever. And our president comes out with zero credibility on anything and talks about masking kids. Here's what he said.
Cases among children are still rare, and severe cases among children are very, very rare. Make sure that everyone around your child who can be vaccinated is vaccinated. Parents, adults, teens. 2, make sure your child is masked when they leave home. That's how we can best keep our kids safe.
Rare, very, very rare. Also, wear your mask whenever you leave home. Doug Badger is here from Heritage Foundation. Doug, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you. Let's focus on Florida for a second because the media is, because of DeSantis, obviously, and they have to trash Florida and trash DeSantis because he's going to possibly be our next president. And they're just lying and misleading and not giving proper perspective, and I'm grateful that you are. Tell us about the truth of ICU capacity when it comes to Florida, because they're overwhelmed, they say.
Yeah, and I think certainly the ICU occupancy is up over where it was during normal times. We're seeing more patients there and more patients with COVID, but they are not approaching capacity on a statewide basis. There are some hospitals that certainly are having to step up their staffing and facing some challenges. But the notion that Florida hospitals are all being overwhelmed with COVID patients is at best an exaggeration. It's a story the press likes to write. They were writing it this time last summer when they were telling us how great Cuomo was doing and how terrible DeSantis was. Their sentiments toward Cuomo have cooled a little bit, but they are just as critical of DeSantis this summer as they were last.
We got some numbers here. In Florida, 84.2% of inpatient beds are occupied. As we talked about earlier, that's about normal, right? Like ICU capacity is normally about 80 to 90% for any given hospital at any time. So it's right in the middle. But here's the interesting perspective too. 22% of those are COVID patients. I think people assume that if 85% of the ICU is full, that means they're all COVID patients, right? We just think that. But no, it's like 20%, 25% of them are COVID patients. So it's not overrun because of COVID.
No, that's right. I mean, look, you get an influx of patients for any particular disease, it's going to increase the number of beds you're going to have occupied. But you're absolutely right. Now, some of the numbers, I'm looking at some HHS numbers. I think they're talking about 30% of inpatients in Florida are COVID. But whatever it is, whatever the number happens to be on a particular day, you're absolutely right. It's not as though COVID is overwhelming this or keeping patients with other medical conditions from getting the care they need.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the end is at this point? I haven't heard any metrics for when the madness will stop, other than the head of the CDC said that we can begin to talk about the end of masking kids when all kids are fully vaccinated. What are we doing?
Well, we keep moving the goalpost when you talk about federal public health officials, and it's never clear to me what the goal is. For me, the most reasonable goal would be to tamp down on serious illness and deaths. And deaths in Florida from COVID, you don't hear this very much. When I wrote the article 2.5 weeks ago, we were seeing about 72 COVID deaths a day. It's now 38. It's been declining over the last 3 weeks. So sure, we don't want to see increases in infections. We don't want to see people in hospital or in intensive care. But ultimately, things seem to be moving in a better direction in Florida than they were earlier this month. And I think that's the focus I'd like to see public health officials direct their attention to try to really cut back on serious illness and death.
Yeah, of course they don't. Doug Badger from Heritage Foundation. Doug, good to talk to you, sir. Thanks for the perspective. And perspective brings peace. I'm grateful for you. And also, we never hear, it's talking about good news, we never hear any good news like people discharged from the hospital. We never hear that either. All right, we're going to talk a lot more about Afghanistan tomorrow. This is a huge problem, and I don't see a way out. Talk more about that. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.